In the vastness of space where silence reigns supreme, humanity was not expected. Yet, we arrived with a force to be reckoned with. Join us as we explore No One Was Meant to Arrive. Then, humanity's war fleet took the stage, a tale where our tenacity turns the tides of destiny. Dive into the heart of action where humanity's war fleet redefines the rules of engagement and secures our place in the cosmic theater. Witness the saga where humanity shouts, "Fuck yeah," to the cosmos. Subscribe for more stories where we conquer the stars. There was a time when the stars burned with fire not from suns but from war. Long before the galaxy was wrapped in council treaties and neutral zones, before the luxury liners and diplomatic enclaves, there was chaos. Worlds rose and fell in the span of a generation. And somewhere among the madness, humanity made its stand. We were new, raw, primitive by galactic standards. But we were fierce. When the old empires stumbled upon Earth, they didn't come as friends. They came with demands, resources, compliance, and obedience Earth refused, not out of arrogance, but survival. And so the war began. What the galaxy didn't expect was how fast humanity would adapt. We were slow to start, yes. But once we understood the rules of interstellar conflict, we broke them. We built ships out of desperation, weapons out of instinct, tactics born from centuries of Earth's own brutal history. The early battles were bloody. We lost colonies, fleets, families. But we gave as much as we got. Some say humanity's greatest. Strength wasn't its technology, it was its memory. We remembered every betrayal, every world that turned its back, every alliance that crumbled when we needed it most. And then came the project. No one knows exactly when it began. Some say it was during the siege of Mars. Others think it started when the Europa Accord collapsed. What we do know is this. Deep, beneath the surface of Earth, a secret was born. A program so massive, so terrifying in scale, that only a species facing extinction could justify it. They called it the Ghost Fleet. Hundreds of ships, each the size of cities, built in silence, hidden in ocean trenches, hollowed out moons, and sealed underground vaults. Ships that never launched, weapons that never fired. A fleet designed not for that war but for the one that would come after. Because the war did end, at least officially. The empires signed peace. Earth was left standing, bruised but alive. And then, we vanished. No trade, no diplomats, no signals. For nearly 200 years, humanity disappeared from galactic view. Our space was marked as off-limits. Quarantine zone, they called it. Rumors swirled. Some said we'd gone extinct. Others whispered that Earth had sealed itself away to build something terrible. Most just moved on, grateful the violent species had left the stage. Time passed. New powers rose. Old enemies became friends. The war with Earth became history, then myth. And the Ghost Fleet? Just another story told in dark corners of spaceports. Something to scare cadets and amuse veterans. A forgotten relic from a forgotten war. But history has a way of circling back, especially when you try too hard to erase it. Because Earth never stopped building. It never stopped remembering. And in the quiet dark, surrounded by layers of silence and stone, the Ghost Fleet waited. Not asleep, just listening. After Earth fell silent, the galaxy exhaled. It was as if a storm had finally passed. The old empires licked their wounds and turned their attention inward. Trade routes were rebuilt, borders redrawn. Diplomacy blossomed. A new age of cooperation began to take shape. One built on the shared relief that the war was over and the troublemaker was gone. Humanity, once feared and hated in equal measure, faded from conversation. At first there were arguments, endless debates in the halls of the Galactic Council about how to deal with Earth's silence. Some wanted surveillance, others proposed a containment fleet, but over time the noise faded. No one heard anything from the Sol system. No ships came out, no signals, no probes, nothing. So the Council reallocated its attention. Commerce became the new battlefield. Mega corporations expanded into new star systems, harvesting gas giants and mining unclaimed moons. New alliances were formed, not from loyalty, but convenience. And as peace became profitable, war became unfashionable. The younger races, born after the Earth conflict, didn't even believe humanity had been real. They saw the war stories as propaganda, parables told by veterans who'd seen too much and remembered it too vividly. They couldn't imagine humans as anything more than rumor. Who could believe in this age of elegance and stability that a single species had brought the entire galaxy to the edge of collapse? Even the records were vague. Whole archives were mysteriously redacted. Video logs deleted. Hollows corrupted or missing. It was as if someone, or something, had gone to great lengths to erase the truth. All that remained were fragments, ghosts in the code. Echoes of warnings long since dismissed. Still, not everyone forgot. There were a few, very few, who kept the memories alive. Fringe scholars, independent historians, retired officers who'd fought in the war and had seen Earth's fury up close. They spoke in hushed voices, careful not to say too much because questioning the official story had consequences. One of those consequences was obscurity. Anyone who looked too closely at Earth was labeled a conspiracy theorist, a relic, a fool, chasing shadows. But still some searched, quietly, obsessively, because there was something unsettling about how quiet Earth had been. Too quiet, for too long. Ships that approached the quarantine zone never returned. Probes went in, but data never came back. Entire exploration teams vanished without trace, and yet no response came from Earth. No threats, no warnings, just silence. That kind of silence didn't feel natural. It felt planned, engineered. But the galaxy was busy. Civilizations were thriving. The Council's influence had spread farther than ever before. New starways were mapped, artificial planets constructed, and still, no sign of the humans. Eventually, most believed what they wanted to believe, that Earth had burned itself out, that whatever fire had once driven them had turned to ash, that the species who once threatened the galaxy had finally destroyed itself. It was easier that way, easier to forget the screaming skies, easier to forget the battles that cracked moons and scorched atmospheres, easier to believe that the ghost fleet never existed. But the oldest veterans knew better. They had seen the look in human eyes, not hate, not anger, resolve. They remembered what humanity said when the war ended. You may win peace by silence, but never by forgetting. And somewhere, in the cold, dark space beyond the edge of every map, a signal waited. Buried deep, ancient, waiting for the moment someone would be foolish enough to listen, because peace, like memory, is a fragile thing, and ghosts are patient. It started with a flicker, a routine scan, just another background sweep conducted by an automated relay station floating somewhere near the galactic rim. The station had been there for decades, silently processing data, cleaning up anomalies, tagging asteroids. Most of its findings were discarded by the central system before they ever reached a technician's eyes. But this time, something got through. A spike. A burst of energy so faint and so distant it should have been lost to the void. It didn't match any known natural pattern. It was structured, artificial, purposeful. The signal came from inside the quarantine zone. First, the Council dismissed it. They assumed it was an echo, a fragment bouncing off some long-dead satellite or debris field. But then it repeated. Exactly. Every 72 hours. A pulse. A message. Carried on frequencies that hadn't been used in over 200 years. It was a language no one remembered, because it wasn't a language meant for the galaxy. It was human, not a call for help, not a cry for peace. It was a heartbeat. That's when people started to pay attention. The Council summoned a special session. Representatives from the core systems debated for hours. Should they investigate? Should they send a probe? Or was this just an old machine firing off a broken signal? Nothing more than leftover tech from a species long gone? But some weren't so sure. Among them was an old historian, Rether Velen. She had spent her entire career studying the Earth conflict, piecing together records that others had ignored. She stood on the floor of the council hall and said only one sentence. "If that signal is what I think it is, it's not broken. It's waking up." The room went silent. A week later, a small science vessel was dispatched, unmarked, quiet. The crew consisted of researchers, engineers, and one heavily armed escort ship. They were told it was a routine exploration. They left for the edge of the quarantine zone and never came back. Not a trace, no wreckage, no distress call. Just gone. The council, once again, chose silence. They buried the mission details, classified everything. They didn't want panic. After all, they told themselves, it could have been a gravitational anomaly, a micrometeor storm. Space is full of dangerous things, but others weren't so quick to forget. Private channels lit up. Independent. News relays leaked fragments. Something was happening near Sol. Freighter captains whispered of shadows moving in uncharted space. Patrol ships reported missing drones. Survey beacons went dark. Then, one night cycle later, something unprecedented happened. An ancient station, long, thought dead, reactivated near the asteroid belt on the edge of human space. It powered up slowly, like something stretching after centuries of sleep. Its systems hummed to life, and with them its defenses. Automated cannons, shield generators, beacons that hadn't lit up since before the war. It didn't broadcast a threat. It didn't broadcast at all, it just turned on and waited. It was a sentinel, a watchtower, one of many scattered throughout the Sol system, a network, long dormant, that was now reawakening. And that's when the rumors began again. The Ghost Fleet. Had it survived? Were the legends true? Old soldiers who had fought against humanity in their youth started speaking again. They remembered the terrifying efficiency of Earth's defense grid, the traps hidden inside dead moons, the silent drones that watched from asteroid fields. Humanity didn't build weapons for conquest. They built them for vengeance. If even half the stories were true, the rest of the galaxy was standing on the edge of a sleeping beast's territory, and someone had just rattled the cage. Across the stars, systems began shifting resources, quietly, relocating assets, rewriting protocols. No one declared war. No one said it aloud. But something old and primal had returned to the minds of the council members and their allies. Fear, not of Earth's power, but of what Earth might remember. And still, the signal continued every 72 hours. Steady, calm, deliberate, a spark in the void. They sent a scout, not a fleet, not a public mission. Just one ship, sleek, fast, designed for stealth and long-range observation. It had no weapons to speak of, only sensors, cloaking, and a crew of 3. Their orders were simple: get close, gather readings, and return. No contact, no interference. They never made it to Earth, not because they were destroyed, but because they stopped. Right at the edge of the Sol system, just past Neptune's shadow, the scout ship hit a wall. Not a physical one, something subtler. A field. Dense, complex, invisible to standard scans. It wasn't made of metal or radiation. It was information. A grid of signals and frequencies woven through space itself. And it was watching. The ship's systems flickered. Lights dimmed, engines slowed. Then everything shut down except the observation deck. That's where the crew saw it. Earth blue, green. White clouds swirling like brushstrokes over an old familiar world. But this wasn't the Earth from their data archives. This Earth was surrounded. Not by satellites, but by structures, stations, rings, dark geometric patterns too symmetrical to be natural, too quiet to be friendly. One of the crew whispered, "They've built a cage, around their own world." But it wasn't a cage. It was a shell, a fortress. Layer upon layer of defense systems, disguised as planetary rings, moons, and debris. Not active, but humming, waiting. The kind of stillness you see before a volcano erupts. Then the ship's sensors picked up movement. A ship rose from behind the moon. Just one. No lights, no ID tags. It moved with the slow certainty of something very old and very sure of itself. Its hull was black, jagged, and smooth all at once, almost like it had grown instead of being built. It passed by the scout without slowing, without scanning, without acknowledging. The crew didn't breathe. Then a second ship emerged, then a third, a slow parade of ancient giants peeling away from the dark side of the earth, rising from places no one had known to look. Ocean floors, hollowed-out asteroids, ice fields at the poles. They weren't launching. They were waking up. The scout recorded everything. Hours of footage. Images of vessels larger than anything the Council had ever built, moving with the eerie precision of machines with memory, as if each one knew exactly where to go and why. The crew didn't try to escape. They didn't have to. When the power returned, they simply drifted back out of range and sent the data. No one stopped them. No warning was given. No message followed. It was as if Earth wanted them to see. And when the data reached the Council, the illusion shattered. Humanity hadn't died. It hadn't collapsed. It hadn't been hiding out of fear or shame. It had been watching, building, preparing. The images were studied frame by frame. Experts argued over the technology. Some of it was familiar, old Earth ship designs, heavily modified. But other parts weren't. There were symbols no one could translate, structures that defied modern physics, propulsion systems with no visible output. The kind of technology that didn't come from desperation but patience, long patience. And then came the real shock. One of the ships bore a symbol, not a flag, not a crest, a phrase, Old Earth English, 3 words. We remember everything. It wasn't a slogan, it was a promise. The Council went into crisis mode, emergency meetings, silent votes, contingency plans dusted off from vaults no one had opened in generations. For the first time in over 2 centuries, there was a sense that the galaxy's rulers weren't in control anymore. They had spent so long mocking Earth, so long dismissing the humans as relics of a brutal age. And now, those relics were stirring, not with rage, but with purpose. Across the stars, whispers began to spread. Traders refused to go near the quarantine zone. Border stations doubled their patrols. Some systems went completely dark, choosing to break contact rather than risk being noticed. Because if the ghost fleet was real, then everything else might be too. The traps, the fail-safes, the memory of betrayal. Humanity had vanished not out of weakness but out of design. They had not disappeared. They had been digging in. Now Earth was no longer a question mark on the map. It was a clock, and the ticking had begun. It began with the oceans. Across Earth's vast seas, the surface trembled. Not from storms or tectonic shifts, but from movement beneath. Slow, deliberate. The kind of movement that has weight behind it. Ancient weight. And then the water broke. The first hull emerged, not a ship by current galactic standards, but something else entirely. More fortress than cruiser. Its surface was armored with a matte black alloy that absorbed light, shaped not with aesthetic in mind, but with survival. Around it, the water boiled, not from heat, but from energy displacement as its reactors spun to life for the first time in over 2 centuries. It was followed by others. One by one, the oceans gave up their secrets. Massive hangar doors opened on the sea floor, circular, rusted over, but still functional. From the trenches and fissures of Earth's deepest waters, ships rose like leviathans. Some had no names. Others bore designations etched in human language. Most carried no markings at all, and not a single one communicated. They didn't have to. Satellites above Earth began to realign. Rings once believed to be civilian infrastructure snapped into formation, defensive patterns, sensor grids, kinetic rail systems. The once quiet shell around Earth moved as one, shifting from dormancy to readiness without a word. It was a symphony of reawakening. All across the Sol system, dormant stations lit up. Automated repair drones resumed patrols. Ancient platforms, buried in Martian soil, powered on. Even the old colony wrecks, those considered abandoned long ago, began to self-repair. It was as if the system itself had been holding its breath, and finally exhaled. And still, no words, no threats, just movement. The ghost fleet wasn't coming. It was rising. Outposts on the edge of the quarantine zone picked up the energy surges first. Gravity fluctuations, spikes in electromagnetic interference, faint rhythmic vibrations passing through subspace. It was like a drumbeat echoing through the void. The Council's fleet scrambled. Recon units were dispatched, though none were allowed too close. What they saw was enough. Hundreds of ships. Not all the same. Some sharp and narrow. Others massive and broad, designed for planetary sieges. A few didn't even seem to obey basic ship physics, gliding sideways through space as if friction or inertia meant nothing to them. But the most unsettling thing of all? Their silence. They didn't hail passing ships, didn't answer scans, didn't broadcast their intentions. They moved with the slow certainty of a force that had waited too long to rush now. A fleet that didn't need to make threats because it had become the warning itself. Speculation spread like fire. Were they planning an invasion, a retaliation, or was this simply a demonstration? No one knew. But the effect was immediate. All across the galaxy, empires that once dismissed Earth held emergency sessions. Defense contracts soared. Black market weapon dealers tripled their prices. Entire systems began evacuating outer colonies. The fear wasn't just about war. It was about memory. Because, for all their advancements, all their peace treaties, the galaxy had never seen anything quite like humanity. A species that had learned to survive not through strength alone, but through obsession. Obsession with never being betrayed again. Obsession with never being caught unprepared. And now, the product of that obsession was on the move. The Ghost Fleet didn't spread propaganda. It didn't demand territory or tribute. It simply existed, and that was more than enough to shift the balance of power in the galaxy overnight. Old enemies began to ask themselves if they had ever truly understood humans. Because this wasn't vengeance. This was remembrance. Built into steel, fire, and silence. One council member, a former admiral, said it best. They didn't return to start a war. They never left it. And still, Earth said nothing. As the last of the fleet cleared the atmosphere and slipped into space, the galaxy held its breath. What came next would not be chosen by diplomats. It would be chosen by those who remembered what had been done, and those who had waited, patiently, to respond. They had no choice but to respond. The Galactic Council couldn't stay silent any longer. The reawakening of the Ghost Fleet had become the single most discussed event in every star system. Civilian populations were panicking. Trade routes were collapsing. The balance of power had tilted, and no one knew in which direction. So the Council did what it always did when frightened. It sent a diplomatic envoy, a perfectly assembled team of ambassadors, historians, and linguists, each selected for their calm temperament, cultural fluency, and the hope that their smiles would carry further than their weapons. Their vessel was neutral, unarmed, emblazoned with council insignia, and filled with symbols of peace. They set course for the edge of Sol space, broadcasting a clear, respectful message in all known languages. We come in peace. We seek understanding. We acknowledge the silence, and we ask to speak. For a full standard day, there was no answer. Then, as they crossed into what ancient maps once labeled as human neutral space, their ship stopped, not by engine failure, by force. Their systems were still online. The crew could move, breathe, speak. But the ship itself, its engines, its navigation, even its momentum, froze, as if space itself had wrapped around it. Then the lights dimmed, and every monitor on the ship went black. Not for long. Just a moment, and then something appeared. 3 words, in Old Earth script. We remember everything. No voice, no explanation, no translation needed. The message stayed on the screens for 13 seconds. Then the ship was released. Just like that. No damage, no follow-up message. The crew turned back, shaken but alive. When they returned, their testimony was played across every major channel in the galaxy. The footage of those words, simple, sharp, unmistakable, spread like wildfire. It was not a welcome. It was not a warning. It was a declaration. The council held an emergency vote. Should they respond? Should they prepare for conflict? Should they attempt a second envoy? But the decision was made for them. 3 days later, a communications burst spread through subspace, not sent to the council, not targeted at any one species or empire. It flooded every known channel simultaneously, civilian, military even. Ancient backups once thought obsolete. It was not a message, it was a memory, a data package. Historical footage, archives, voices, screams, scenes from the war no one had spoken of in generations. Videos of the betrayal at Vesper Gate, where council ships opened fire on a retreating human fleet under the guise of alliance. Images from the Scouring of Titan, where Earth colonies were wiped out despite waving surrender flags. Audio logs from diplomats who were executed mid-negotiation. All of it, all the things the galaxy had buried, humanity had kept the receipts. The transmission ended with a single image, one that hadn't been seen in over 2 centuries Earth, not as a globe but as a command seal. A symbol once worn by human fleet commanders, a stylized planet encircled by a burning ring. Beneath it, one final line: no forgiveness, no forgetting. After that, silence returned. But the damage had been done. Worlds that had laughed at the legends of the Ghost Fleet were now fortifying their borders. Stations that had mocked human ingenuity were now scrambling for defense upgrades. Empires that had signed treaties against Earth were quietly rewriting their histories. The past was no longer dead. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to speak. Some tried to dismiss it. They said the footage could have been forged. The message might have come from an extremist group, not Earth itself. But deep down, everyone knew this was no lie. It wasn't anger. It wasn't vengeance. It was remembrance, weaponized. One high-ranking official from the Vexari Syndicate, the same species that had once turned on humanity mid-war, resigned from her post. Before leaving, she gave a quiet interview. One line from it went viral. They didn't respond with threats. They responded with the truth. And that truth is more dangerous than any fleet. From that day forward, silence became the galaxy's defense. No more envoys were sent. No fleets entered Sol space. And the phrase, "we remember everything," became more than a warning. It became a mirror, held up to every world that once turned its back on Earth. They moved without warning. No declaration of war, no grand speech, no ultimatum. The Ghost Fleet simply changed course and began to move, not toward the Council's capital or the great trade routes of the core worlds. Not even toward the strongest military outposts. Instead, they headed for the places history had tried to forget, the systems that had betrayed Earth in the war, quietly, efficiently, without apology. Planets that had accepted human aid during the early days of conflict, then turned their guns on the very ships that had defended them. Stations that had broadcast false distress calls just to lure Earth's fleets into ambushes. Humanity had never struck back. Until now. The first target was an outpost called Raylan's Point, a minor way station, forgotten by most. It had once served as a forward base for Earth's allies, until its leaders had handed over coordinates of a human refugee fleet in exchange for safe passage and favor with the Council. The betrayal had never made the history books. But Earth remembered. The Ghost Fleet didn't fire. They arrived in orbit without a sound. 5 ships, arranged in perfect formation, casting long shadows over the station's atmosphere, No demands, no communication, just presence. For 13 hours, the station froze. Every attempt to contact the ships failed. Every scan returned scrambled data. Then slowly, a single relay satellite detached from the fleet and descended into orbit. It transmitted a single message, an audio file. Unencrypted. Clear. It was the voice of a child. Crying. The original distress call from the refugee fleet. Recorded. The day it was ambushed, the station shut down. Its leaders resigned within the week. The outpost was evacuated within a month. No shot had been fired. No damage done, but everyone understood. The Ghost Fleet moved on. Next was the mining colony at Talor 3. It had once been a neutral zone until it had allowed council ships to pass through its airspace to bomb human settlements during the war. Back then, the Talorans had claimed they were just following orders. When the Ghost Fleet arrived, they didn't land. They simply hovered in low orbit and projected a holographic image across the entire sky. It was a list. Names. Thousands of names. Those who had died in the bombings. Civilians. Scientists. Children. Each name appeared in glowing letters one by one for hours. When the projection ended, the Ghost Fleet left. The colony hasn't reopened since. Again and again, this pattern repeated. The Ghost Fleet would arrive, say nothing, show the truth, and leave. To some, this was worse than war, because war could be justified, explained, measured. But this was reminder, cold, patient, relentless. The fleet never destroyed a city, never reduced a planet to ash. They didn't have to. Their presence alone unmade entire systems. Economies collapsed. Governments fell, all without a single missile. Word spread fast. If your world had betrayed Earth, if your records had been altered to erase it, if you'd ever whispered, "They're gone, they'll never come back," then your turn was coming. But not all suffered. Some chose differently. On the fringe world of Nazca 9, an elder named Saro, the last surviving member of a peacekeeping unit that had refused to fire on Earth's forces, stood in the center of his village as the ships approached. He raised a hand to the sky and whispered, "You were right to wait." The Ghost Fleet passed without stopping, and the people of Nazca 9 understood. This wasn't about conquest. This wasn't revenge. It was memory in motion. A galaxy that had once united to erase a species now found itself confronting the one thing. It had tried to avoid the truth, because the humans had never wanted to rule the stars. They had only wanted to be left alone. And when that wasn't granted, when their cries were ignored, their allies abandoned them, and their homes were betrayed. Earth had done what Earth always did. It prepared. Now the fleet moved not like an army, but like a storm, cleansing not with fire, but with truth. And the galaxy, for all its weapons and pride, had no defense against the one force it had never respected: remembrance. The fleet stopped at the edge of the galaxy. After months of silent movement, of showing, not telling, of leaving systems shaken but intact, the Ghost Fleet came to a halt. They gathered in the void between known space and the ancient black. Hundreds of ships, each one a silent monument to something the galaxy had tried to bury. There were no more projections, no more visits, no more appearances, just silence. And still, that silence held more weight than 1,000 warships screaming across the stars. The Council didn't know what to do. They had no targets left to erase, no lies left to protect. Their archives had been cracked open by the very people they had tried to forget. Entire species had turned inward, ashamed or terrified. Allies questioned alliances. Treaties collapsed under the weight of their own redacted clauses. But still, Earth had not spoken. Until now. The transmission didn't come across military channels. It didn't come with encryption, codes, or conditions. It came through the civilian networks, unfiltered, raw, and timed to hit every known screen at once. Every terminal, every holo, every broadcast tower. It was not a speech. It was a voice. Human, firm, cold, clear, Not angry, not bitter, but tired and resolute. It said, "You left us behind." That was the first line. No introduction, no justification. You watched us burn, and you said it was unfortunate. You saw our ships fall, and you turned away. You signed treaties while our colonies died. You erased what you did from your records, but we never erased what we lived. Pause. Then the voice continued. We did not return for revenge. We did not return to rule. We did not return to remind you of our pain. We returned to remind you of yourselves. A soft tone echoed beneath the words, almost like a heartbeat rapped. In static, you build your empires on silence, on forgetting. You count the years and call it peace, but you do not ask what price was paid to get it. We remember that price. And now, so will you. The signal ended with no image, no anthem, just silence. But this silence was different. It was not the stillness of fear. It was the silence of being seen. And across the galaxy, something changed. Not in fire or rubble, but in posture. On the core world of Atris, the planetary senate lowered its flags to half-mast, not for a death, but for a recognition. On the trade hub of Varnex Delta, where smugglers once laughed at Earth's name, every ship paused for a full minute of stillness. No departures, no docking, no traffic. Even the council, proud and ancient, met in private. And for the first time in its history, it issued no statement, no condemnation, no orders. Just a blank report. They knew. They all knew. And perhaps that was the point. The Ghost Fleet never demanded apologies. They never asked for compensation. They didn't need the galaxy to kneel, but the galaxy did anyway. Not out of submission, but out of understanding. And when that moment passed, when every screen dimmed and the stars resumed their patient spinning, the Ghost Fleet moved one last time. Not inward-outward beyond the mapped sectors, past the edge of civilization, into the darkness between galaxies where the stars grow thin and the silence is ancient. They left. No beacons, no monuments, no flag left behind. Just the memory of what they were, what they endured, and what they became. And that was enough. In time, new empires would rise. New wars might spark. But the story of the Ghost Fleet would remain, not as a tale of terror, but of truth. A reminder that there are some who do not forget, some who remember the cost, some who carry silence not as surrender but as a shield, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all.